We are going to talk about equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions are fractions that are equal. Now, fractions can have different numbers in them, and just because they have different numbers in them doesn't mean that they're not the same. For example, if I have 2/3 and 4/6, these fractions are actually equivalent. I'm going to show you two different ways that we can see that those fractions are equivalent. One is, here is my 2/3, 1/3, 2/3. Here is my 4/6, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have 2/3 there, I have 4/6 there. If I line those up, that shows me that those two fractions are exactly the same. So 2/3, that's visual proof that 2/3 equals 4/6. Now also, we can use a calculator to show that those are equivalent. The fraction bar on a fraction actually means divided by. So if I take 2 and divide it by 3, that equals 0.6666, continuing on forever. And if I do the same thing to 4/6, if I do 4 divided by 6 equals, that gives me the same exact answer. So that once again shows that these fractions are equal, that these fractions are equivalent. Now, how do we create an equivalent fraction? How do we check to see if a fraction is equivalent without having our manipulatives or a calculator or anything? Well, if the numerator and the denominator, if the numerator and the denominator are both multiplied by the same exact thing, then the fraction will be equivalent. So what I have here is I have 2/3, and if I multiply the numerator times 2, it will equal 4. If I multiply this denominator by 2, that will equal 6. So if I multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same thing, it will give me an equivalent fraction. So if I start with 3/4, I can multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same exact thing, and it's going to give me an equivalent fraction. Now I can do anything with the exception of 0. If I do times 1, it's obviously going to give me 3/4, which is certainly equal to 3/4. I can do times 2, times 10, times 50, times 75, anything at all, as long as I multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same exact thing. So since any number with the exception of 0 will work, why not use the easiest numbers I can, like 2. So times 2. I'm going to multiply my numerator times 2, and that will be 6. I'm going to multiply my denominator times 2, and that will be 8. So 3/4 equals 6/8. Now I'll put those in my calculator just to prove to you, just to show you that they're equal. 3 divided by 4 equals 0.75, and 6 divided by 8 equals 0.75. That shows that those two fractions are equivalent. Now sometimes, like let's say we'll start with 3/8. Sometimes we don't want to multiply both of these by 2, because if I multiply 8 by 2, I'm going to end up with 16. So I'll end up with a really big fraction. Actually, I don't want 3/8. Let's go with 2/8. So I don't want to multiply the denominator and the numerator by 2, or I'm going to end up with a fraction with a large denominator. It's beneficial to keep your denominators on the small side when you're dealing with fractions, if you can. So in order to create a fraction that's equivalent to 2/8 and keep the fraction small, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to multiply this side by 2 to get to 2/8. So what is this numerator? What is this denominator? That if I multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, it'll give me 2/8. So in other words, what times 2 will equal 2? Well, 1 times 2 will equal 2. And what times 2 will equal 8? 4. So 1/4 will equal 2/8. 2/8 will equal 1/4. 1/4. So you can go this way and multiply the fraction, the numerator and the denominator by 2, or you can say what times 2 will equal what the numerator and the denominator is. But as I stated before, you need to make sure to create an equivalent fraction, you must multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same exact thing. If you do that, it will give you an equivalent fraction.